This is a question for Bronwyn, I think, probably, and Leonie. Just with the research you've done, have you looked at like school library sort of collection management policies and whether they have an impact on students or young people's reading habits and behaviours? I'm sort of thinking around like having senior fiction collections that are not accessible to lower secondary students or that kind of thing. Just wondering if you've looked at that.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think Leonie would probably agree with this, is that's not something we were anticipating looking at when we started the project. But as soon as we started interviewing teacher librarians, it became quite clear that that is another factor. What I would say is two things. One is there is, in certain school sectors in particular, quite a high degree of anxiety around collections management in terms of age appropriateness and concern about what I would say is anticipated parent response. We've had a lot of discussion. I've had a lot of discussion with librarians about the problem of what to do with Colleen Hoover books. In particular, as Danielle Biggs said, it's a really interesting one. She's adult author, but there's a lot of anecdotal reports of like year 8 in particular sort of being the year that students really want to read it. If it's in a school library, it's probably in a senior fiction, maybe 11, 12 plus, but that, as you can see in our survey results, it has not stopped teenagers reading that book. And interestingly, in some of the focus groups that we've run, I've had teenagers say that they think that she writes for them. They think that Colleen Hoover is an author, and I think Danielle would find that a bit. So that's one side of it. What I would say is there's also a range of policies that schools have, from like anyone want a book, I will get a book, right up to we don't have that type of book in our school library. And I think it obviously does have an impact on what teenagers are looking at, and it's something we're starting to work up a bit of an article on that. The reason that I say it seems to be an anticipated parent concern is that we've not had a lot of examples of actual student complaints being identified, but more sort of, there's a very strong sense of curation in the school library collections policies, both in terms of for what age am I catering for, and also quality and choice. And we do see some schools where the collections is really driven by student interest, in the sense that we've had a couple of examples of schools where they get booksellers in with lots of displays and students identify what sort of books they'd like to have. And then there's other schools in which it's very clearly staff-driven and managed and at quite a sort of high level. So I'd say there's a diversity of responses. Some of that depends on the school culture. Some of it depends on the individual people working in the library sector. It is having an impact. Sorry? Look, it's hard to know exactly what that impact is, because if you want to take the Colleen Hoover example, it's not a book that appears in a lot of school libraries, but a lot of teenagers are still reading it. So if a teenager really wants to read something, I don't think availability in a school library is necessarily going to stop them. But it is something that we're mindful of in terms of the way that school libraries are positioned. Are they reading for pleasure more broadly, or are they seen as a supplement to the curriculum resources of the school? This sort of question goes back to what is the purpose of a school library, and every school answers that differently.
If you have my slides, I can show you the part of the reason why maybe Colleen Hoover is such a topic at the moment.
From what the young people that you're getting data from, are any of them talking about those sorts of policies? What is the impact of those policies on their reading habits? Not should we have them, should we not, Colleen Hoover. Like what are the students saying? Yeah.
It depends on the students. We haven't had a lot of students talking about it directly, but for one of the schools that we did speak to, one of the members of the school library, they had quite a strict collections policy. That librarian recounted discussions with students where they'd say, oh, have you got this book? And then the question would be, do you think this is appropriate for our school library? And the students would think about it and go, no. So I think the impact more broadly would be that teenagers do have an awareness of books for different contexts. So they are aware of whether it's a book that they'd be able to get from the school library, whether it's a book that they're happy to read in front of their parents, whether it's a book that they read somewhere else. So I think that's the other point I'd make. Like, teenage readers are sophisticated consumers of culture. They don't uncritically pick up books, as we see from our rather discerning readers that won't take book recommendations from anybody else. So I think with these types of situations, I think they have an understanding of these are the types of books that are in my school and these are the types of books that I can get from somewhere else.